Joe Rogan, like many people, is interested in spirituality, but concerned about the dangers of cult-like behavior of many religious institutions. So in this conversation with Will Storr, they're going to touch on the nature of story and community. And ironically, that's something that we have been covering in this podcast. So it seems natural that we would jump into this conversation. I'm glad you're with me. Let's get into it.
I think sort of the general thesis is that the humans want two things. They want connection into groups, and then once they're in the group, they want status. So it's not enough to feel like we're a Christian. We have to be a good Christian, and that means following certain rules.
Following certain rules. Is that what makes a good Christian? Is it following the rules? I don't know. It's like these versions of Christianity that pop up. It's like, I don't believe in those either. As a Christian, I do believe in Christianity. I believe in the person of Jesus. But oftentimes people try to explain to me what Christianity is, and I go, yeah, well, I wouldn't believe in that either.
And that's what brains just want to do. That brains don't really care about what's true. Brains are always asking this question: who do I have to be, and what do I have to believe in order to earn connection and status?
Yes.
And we're all vulnerable to this stuff. And that's how
Yes.
people end up believing in crazy things, because the brain's just believing what it has to believe.
I've seen it with people that get what you call audience capture.
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
their audience, they get some love. You can only, if you're doing it politically, you can only do it once. Did something happen where you just radically change your ideology? Or did you get captured by the idea of being accepted with much more vigor by the other side? Like, that's one thing that they really do enjoy, when someone bails on the other side. And then, again, you can only do it once, but you get like really embraced.
And the other side, how many sides are there? I mean, it feels like there's lots, but it's interesting. He says, did something happen to you that allowed you to change your sort of ideology? That's really interesting, because as a Christian person, I feel like that is what happened to me. I feel like I came into contact with the person of Jesus. It was dramatic. It was traumatic. It was life-changing. And sometimes you have to have an experience like that to sort of get you out of maybe sort of your set of expectations, your set of presuppositions, but also this idea of audience capture. I mean, we live in a social media world. It's like, I posted this thing and I got a bunch of likes, so I'm going to do that. But now I need to do it to a much more severe degree. So there is one way where this, kind of getting woken up out of your set of presuppositions can be healthy. I think the thing for me would be that you need to live in a community that has a healthy dose of sort of philosophy and opponent processing. And we'll get into the theme of unity and diversity as they talk about cults here, because that's ultimately the difference between kind of a healthy community and a cult, is that there's no debate. When you're in a cult, there's no debate. There's no discussing the matter. And so you need to find a community that allows for freedom, but there also needs to be form that sort of holds that freedom together in some way. There needs to be freedom in that community, but there needs to be enough form so that freedom doesn't turn in on yourself and sort of become self-harm, So there's this balance of unity and diversity, freedom within form. The cults get it wrong. I think that, honestly, the community we call the church gets it right. Now, you can disagree with me, hang in there, and we'll kind of unpack that as we go.
That's right, and the more you embrace, the more you believe. And
yes,
I mean, there's this concept that I write about. I call it active belief. Like, there are loads of beliefs that we have, like, how long is the Mississippi River? What is coffee? Like, we don't argue about these beliefs, but there are certain categories of belief that possess us, and these are the beliefs that we form our identity around, and they're beliefs that we plug our status into. So, like, if you're a Christian, it's like, I believe Jesus died and then 3 days later got up. And as I said, these beliefs are kind of dangerous because they take us over. It's not enough just to believe them passively. You have to act them out with your life.
Ooh, is that dangerous? That's dangerous. It's dangerous that your beliefs would have something to do with how you act them out in your life. And it's also, I just chuckle at the Jesus dies and 3 days later he gets up. That is certainly one way of describing the resurrection of Jesus, that he conquered death itself. I don't know Will Storr. I'm not trying to be combative with him. I like hearing things that maybe I'm familiar with, the idea of the resurrection, from other people. And it's, again, that's healthy. It's healthy to be in a place where you're not constantly talking to people that you agree with. And so hearing it from someone else it's interesting for me. You know, I'm not trying to be combative. I'm trying to highlight how that's kind of interesting. Certainly beliefs can be dangerous. Dangerous beliefs are dangerous. But what about beliefs that motivate you to be self-sacrificial and courageous and be a good member of your community? Is that bad, that those types of beliefs would sort of manifest in our behavior? Is all belief bad? Or do we have to sort of sift through belief and figure out which ones are going to, I'll just say, like, lead to life and which ones are going to lead to destruction and death? That's maybe the way I would think about it. But it does seem, let me know your feedback, seem like he kind of lumped all beliefs into this, like, this is dangerous because these beliefs can capture us, and then we start behaving according to these beliefs. And I think he's an atheist, so it's like, okay, is atheism not a belief that does that exact same thing? I mean, look at the last 150 years. A lot of people try to live according to that belief, and it didn't go so well.
As I said, you know, these beliefs are kind of dangerous because they take us over. It's not enough just to believe them passively. You have to act them out with your life. And so these are the beliefs that drive things like the satanic panic, cult movements, communism, Nazism. These are beliefs that sort of possess people and take them over. It's like a parasite. They're kind of scary things. But as I said, you know, we're all vulnerable to these kind of active beliefs.
I'm fascinated by cult documentaries. And I was talking to my friend Todd. We were talking about Wild Wild Country. And we both said the same thing. God, in the beginning, it looked awesome. In the beginning, it looked they were having so much fun. And I think of myself at 21. And I had no real, like, confidence in my view of the world. I was 21. I was a young dummy. I did not know, you know, what was correct and what was incorrect. I had a general sense. My family was very left wing. We grew up, my parents were hippies in San Francisco, so I had sort of an ideology attached to that. But I had no idea how anything in the world worked.
And that's where, you know, one thing that cults will tend to do is they look really nice on the outside, and they'll say, oh, we're all about peace and love, and it's all really the same. But then you go in, and it's like, well, here's how we define peace. Here's how we define love. And you realize that things are a little different on the inside. And I think about this as well because I work with young people, but because there are, and I do think that there are dangerous beliefs out there, and we live in this social media world, and it's like you see that, like, how easy is it to be captured by kind of what we see as like a mob mentality expressed in social media? And is that much different from a cult mentality? You know, it's just like we all sort of believe or react in the same way.
And if I ran into the wrong yoga teacher,
no, but that's it. But that's how humans work. You know, with this tribal animal, and nobody has any idea how the world works until they plug into a group, and the group has its stories that it tells about how the world works. Every group has its model of what a hero is, and this set of beliefs a hero has. And once we've plugged into that group, we orient ourselves towards becoming that person.
Okay, that's really interesting because, I mean, essentially it's describing Christianity. It's like, yes, you want to become like Jesus. That's the idea. Now, is this just one set of tribal beliefs among many? Okay, we can have a dialogue on that. Is that bad? And so these are the themes that are really, for me, very interesting in this conversation, because he starts to talk about story and how story binds the community. He says tribal group. I'll go ahead and just say community. So you have a story that binds a community. That story usually has sort of like a hero or somebody who's a model figure that you want to live like, which is essentially Christianity. And I guess the question then becomes, is your story powerful enough to orientate you to the actual world that exists? both with its great beauty and its true horrors. And Francis Schaeffer, a Christian philosopher, talks about this, how the Roman worldview could not sustain the ever-increasing pressure over time. It's like a little Roman bridge that if you drove a modern truck over, the bridge would collapse. And so that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for a story that can truly orientate us to the real world as the pressure of that world increases. So again, for me, it's sort of the Christian, sort of biblical Christian worldview themes here are just sort of hitting me right in the face. Of course, neither of these guys are Christians. So what is that? What does that mean, you know?
And, you know, cults are interesting because cults are like, all human groups are kind of cults, but looser. So every human group is a status game in the sense that it's a group of people who believe the same things, and there's sort of rules for being part of that group. And the better you become at following those rules and becoming its ideal of self, the higher you rise up that status game. The only difference between cult and a religion and a business and a political group is just that it's much tighter. So the rules are much stricter. Like there's a zillion rules. Like, you know, I've written before about what they call there was what was the cult that they castrated themselves?
Yeah, Heaven's Gate.
Heaven's Gate, that's right. Yeah, and they had rules even about like how much toothpaste you're allowed to put on your toothbrush. they had a rule about exactly how scrambled eggs were to be cooked, and the rule was dry but not burnt. So there was a rule about how much water you put in your bathtub. And
was the leader was he castrated as well?
No, he wasn't, surprisingly enough.
Really?
Yeah, they were called T and Doe, and
there
he is T. Yeah,
imagine you are so low in your life that you think that's the guy that has all the answers.
I mean, that's pretty funny. So, okay, but also like traumatically, that's actually traumatic. I said it's funny. It's not. It's traumatic because a lot of those people died, and that's the danger, right? So this is the freedom in form. As form increases, as the rules increase, freedom disappears. So there's too much form. And so then the question becomes, how do you sort of form a group and have a cohesion without the dangers of this type of cult-like behavior? And those dangers are very real. If you know much about the Heaven's Gates cults or any of these cults, there are very real dangers out there. And I think Joe is really interested particularly in Christianity. That's my take. I've just listened to a lot of his stuff, but he's worried that Christianity might dupe him in and that it's a cult. And let's be honest, there are some people who call themselves Christians that are very much a cult. So it is wise to be cautious about this because there are very real dangers out there. And one of the biggest dangers is this sort of deception that's happening. Oh, we're a Christian. We're this. We're all about love, and just depends on what you mean by love.
Is that a tribal thing? This is what I've always assumed, that that's just some holdover from when we were a part of groups of 150 people that needed a leader. And generally that leader would be some old warlord. He's probably like 35, back then. But had gone through a lot and was a strong leader, was someone that you admired as a leader. And maybe in these tribal times, that's baked into our DNA. And when someone comes along and speaks confidently, I am never confident. I'm never confident about if you're so confident about all these thoughts and about what life is about and where we're going and what awaits us. And if you follow these rules, God, that's so confident. I'm not that confident. So I could get sucked in.
Yeah.
Any human could get sucked in. But is that what it's from? Is it from tribal times?
Yes and no. So one of the really surprising things about tribes, the tribes in which we evolved, is that idea of the big man is a bit of a myth. So they were kind of leaderless. Like leaders would bubble up by consensus when, say, we wanted to solve a particular problem to do with hunting. Then the best hunters would be deferred to. And what do you think? But
at some point in time, they became leaders. I mean, they've been leaders for so long.
When we settled down.
When was that? Like agriculture days?
Yeah, that was about 11,000 years ago.
But don't you think that's enough to bake it into our DNA?
I don't know. I think what is in our DNA is that idea of stories. So we're storytelling animals. We think in stories. Every tribe has its particular story about the world, and so we're very good at channeling those stories. And as I said, every story has its design of what is a hero, and we try and become that kind of hero. So that's that holdover from the tribal day.
Is it baked into our DNA because of evolution, or is it just baked into the fabric of reality, that that's what reality is? Essentially, we live in a story. Now, thankfully, you're not the hero, and neither am I. There is a hero to this story. There is a leader. There is a model to look at. But is saying that this phenomenon that is universal for humanity, that we're storytelling people, that we orientate life by story, saying that evolved, I don't know that that's powerful enough. It seems that it's there because it's part of how reality is formed. I mean, in the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." He spoke existence into being. So it seems to me, again, sort of consistent with the biblical Christian framework that I operate from.
But more fundamentally, it's that brain question of, who do I have to be? What do I have to do? Tell me what I have to do in order to achieve connection and status. And that's what a cult does. And that's what a charismatic leader does. It tells you, this is what you've got to do. These are the rules. This is who you have to become. And that's really seductive to us subconsciously, because those two things of connection and status are so incredibly important to us.
Well, and where is the family in this? I mean, he's talking about tribal groups and stuff like that, but there's maybe even a more deeper conversation to be had of like, this is how a family functions. This is like just the basic, again, how the world works. And there's probably people out there that could speak into that with sort of more clarity and more potency than I can. So I would invite some of your comments on that subject of like, again, is this just a tribal thing, or is this just literally how the world works? We create families, families create tribes, tribes create communities, and we're a part of that system. It seems more fundamental, I guess, than something that evolved over time. It seems just, maybe fixed is the wrong word, but it just seems that it's there. That's reality.
Yeah. Is it something you think should be taught like very early on? It seems like this is information we should get to kids as young as we can.
Yeah.
So they can recognize these patterns that people fall into.
Absolutely. I've always thought that there should be a lesson in school about what is a human, what is the basic operating system manual for a human, and these are the mistakes that humans make.
If only we had such an operating manual. My goodness, what would life be? It's too bad we took that out of the schools. Now we're floundering, and we're adrift in chaotic waters. And this is where I think Paul Vanderklay is going to come in to the conversation. I posted this on X, and I just think that we are in a new sort of tribal developmental age. Now, I just said that, my sort of framework is not to say that these things evolve. I think that we adapt. I think we certainly do. And I do think that there are communities that are forming in digital space. And so if you're familiar at all with Paul Vanderklay, you'll be familiar with This Little Corner of the Internet, or TLC. And essentially that's what Paul is talking about here in this clip. I thought that this was good and helpful for us for this conversation.
And Grizz is talking about fire ants, and fire ants apparently in a storm cluster together to preserve the queen and her eggs, and they themselves become all of these little ants. And that's really a power. Maybe I can find a little YouTube video that shows me.
Of course you can.
So here's this video, and here are the fire ants, and yeah, and then there's a flood, and oh, look at them. Look what they're doing. So this is Grim Grizz's image of what's going on, that all these tiny little channels are sort of locking together and trying to hold up something, trying to preserve something, because you can think about the ants as individuals, or you can think of the ants as a collective, as a body, because in many ways ant hives are more than one thing, are one thing, and they're more than one thing, and they do this. They do this in order that the hive can survive, that the group can survive.
And that idea of the body is key. it really is key. Again, we're Joe and Will, they're talking about the need for community, but then the fear of going into, sort of too much community, which becomes a cult. And we need unity and diversity. That's the body. That's the body of Christ. That is how you achieve that. And again, look, I'm speaking from my Christian worldview. That's just how I see things. It's how I make sense of the world. Now, I think that it is, again, talking about these different tribal stories, I think it is the story that all stories came from. So it is fundamentally true, but it's like even more true than just like our concept of truth. We wouldn't have truth if this wasn't the way things are. And so I'm speaking truth and love. We are to grow up in all aspects into him who is the head, even Christ. This is Ephesians 4. For whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, this is an ASB, forgive me, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. So there's different parts of this. Each individual part creates a body. It's held together. Its joints are supported. There is the head, who is Christ. And again, for me, is your story strong enough? Is the hero of your story going to be strong enough to allow you to endure the flood like this little ant colony? Is it going to help? Is it going to allow you to endure the increased pressure of time? I mean, we live in a chaotic time right now. And what Paul is talking about is a community, is another tribe in a sense, just like Joe and Will are talking about. How do these tribes orientate myself to the tribe, and how does the tribe orientate to reality? And how do we endure the flood? Well, I think the way that you engage with that desire or that pursuit without falling into the trap of a cult that's going to supply you a lot of structure but no freedom is if you become a part of a body. This is kind of a mystery. I mean, the body of Christ, like in what way? What do you mean by that? I mean in a very real way, in a way that's kind of hard to understand, is certainly mysterious. But I mean, there are people all over the world who I can empathize with merely because of the fact that we're Christian. We have a shared story, but it's even more than that. We have a shared contact with a very real person. We have community. There's literally a thing that we do called communion, which is very sacred. We all do it. Every Christian, no matter where on the globe you are, you partake in this sacrament of communion. And it's a universal invitation to the table, to an exclusive claim. It is Christ's table. So you follow Christ to find a seat at that table. So it's universal in its invitation, but it's exclusive in its claim. That's the unity and diversity is able to be maintained without falling into the cult trap because of the love of Jesus. I mean, I know that's like the Sunday school answer, but speaking truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him who is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body is fitted together, and what? Building itself up in love. That's how you do it. That's how you can achieve that. And I honestly think Joe Rogan is curious about that. I think he's trying to understand Christianity within this whole landscape of religious organizations, let's say, or religious tribes, maybe even. I really do think he's trying to understand where Christianity fits into all of this. And so, and if you are as well, I hope that this is helpful. That's literally the reason why I sort of create these dialogues. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Share it with a friend if it's helpful. And again, there's layers of this dialogue, because I really hope that you're thinking about this and that then it provokes you to sort of share your thoughts, and you have the opportunity to do that in the comments section. And so we're sort of maybe we're building a tribe, I don't know. Maybe that's what we're doing.
That there should be a lesson in school about what is a human, what is the basic operating system manual for a human, and these are the mistakes that humans make. Because, as I said, one of the sort of big ideas is that we're not particularly interested in the truth. The truth doesn't matter to human brains. What matters is what do I have to believe in order for people to like me and respect me? And the religions and the cults always do that thing of offering amazing rewards, but
of course,
at some point in the future,
bro, heaven, it's the best spot ever.
Yeah.
And the version of heaven differs between how bad the place where you live sucks.
Yeah,
well, and again, this is where it's like I hear people give a version of Christianity, and it's like, well, I don't believe in that either. Heaven, the idea of heaven. Yeah, and for me, you can think about the kingdom of God. That's that's what Jesus says. He says the kingdom of God is in your midst. It is not just something that's far off and distant and future. It's a future promise. It is that, but it's also a very here and now promise. It is already, but it is not yet. So it is already inaugurated, but it has not yet come to its full consummation. And so, and again, going back to communion, we take communion because of what Christ has done in the past, but we partake of it in the present until he comes again in the future. So it unites all aspects of time and history, I guess. And so, yeah, and then just the idea of heaven. It is the best spot ever, but and I always like C.S. Lewis on this. It's a place that is more real than this world. It's that this world would be a shadow by comparison to the glory that awaits us in that heavenly kingdom. So that is a true hope. I mean, it's a future hope, but it's also a present hope.
And it's like, I think there's like 8.5 billion people in the world, and the amount of, I think it's like 500 million atheists. So that just shows you how many, just how wired we are to believe basically any old shit we're told to believe, as long as we feel like it's going to get a status and secure connection into a supportive group.
Okay, so okay, that's an interesting statement, and so bear with me here, because and again, I think Will is coming at this from an atheist, and it's not that, all these billions of people have basically shown us that something is hardwired in each human person and in humanity as a whole that drives us towards the purpose of worship. That's not his conclusion. His conclusion is, do you see how wired we are to believe whatever BS is bopping around? But there's only this small select group of atheists. So you're trying to tell me that small select group of atheists got it right? And the hundreds of billions potentially of people throughout human history that have all orientated themselves around the idea of worship, they got it wrong? Well, wouldn't atheism just be another version of some sort of story that we orientate ourselves to some other group for the purpose of getting status then? So it's just like, the irony. I guess it's just ironic to hear that. And again, I'm thinking that he's coming at it from an atheist perspective. And what he's saying is, do you see that there's only this small group of people who actually got it right? And we just happen to be the ones that got it right. All these religious people throughout all human history, they all got it wrong. We're enlightened. That does sound a little bit like the type of BS that we should be cautious that we don't fall into, believing that type of BS. And again, that's another story. That's a story. The story is we evolved, and we just happen to be the most evolved. This is all animals are equal. It's just some animals are more equal than others. So it is just another story in and amongst other stories. The real question is not how do we orientate ourselves based off of stories, is which story has the power to orientate us to the world the way it actually is. So this is where a person like Martin Shaw is going to come in and really help us here.
I would say what constitutes a myth, very simply, is a sacred story. So in other words, it's a story that's not just for kicking a football down the road. It's a story that you can organize your life around. And myths, as opposed to fairy tales or folk tales, often have something to do with creation in them. How did we get here? What do we long for? How do we cope with disappointment? All that existential stuff. Myths go down the deep end. They are beautiful stories without the use of facts. They tell deeper truths usually than the facts of the matter.
They tell deeper truths than the facts of matter. Paul actually touched on this because he's talking in this podcast about podcasting and like the phenomenon of it. Let me see if I can find this spot. And this kind of takes me back to Joe Rogan. One of the reasons why I think Joe is sort of helping us recapture sort of the oral tradition, the sitting around the campfire and sharing stories. We're doing that now in podcasting. I think that's one of the reasons why Joe's podcast is important for me. You know, Paul and the community of this little corner, I think takes that to the next level and shows that there's an even deeper meaning going on. There's a deeper sort of search for truth. Maybe there's a deeper finding of that truth, or we're finding deeper truths as we participate. You know, we're not just listening now to a podcast. We're actually participating in the development of those ideas. We're giving feedback. We're having conversation and dialogue. We're just doing it in digital space. I find that really, really interesting.
Side of expertise is. Now, what's really interesting about him is he's going to talk about, well, why do you listen to podcasts? Because you get information. Okay, and that triggers the Vervaekeism where do you go for information? Well, Google, podcasts, YouTube, facts. Where do you go for knowledge?
Facts.
Books. Where do you go for wisdom? What is wisdom? Wisdom is trying to figure out how to live, trying to manage information. Don't forget that funny word. Knowledge. Facts. Trying to manage it into one cohesive whole in terms of how should I live? Well, churches, I suppose.
There you go. Churches, I suppose. Why? Okay, why? Because the church is the body. And the body is built up. It's built up by Christ, by that shared story. The church is the community. It's the tribe that has endured through time. It has endured the test of time. It has endured the ever-increasing pressure of society. And to me, that tells me that their story is powerful enough to orientate them to reality the way it should be. And not even, it's even more than that, because the story of the church is a story of worship. What is the chief end of man? What is our purpose here? It is to love God, enjoy Him forever. It is to worship God. I always feel like I always get the catechism wrong, so forgive me. But that's a powerful thing. That stories like Martin Shaw is talking about, stories are sacred because they tell us deeper truths than the facts of the matter. You can hang your heart on a story. It reveals its truth over time and even perpetually can reveal its truth. I was just talking with Michael Bull and Justin Owens about that. Justin, I think I got your last name right, but from Justin's Morning Coffee. So that's more powerful. I should have been highlighting this. What was fascinating to me, I keep trying to take a break. and so I posted this when a community, digital or otherwise, comes together, they can endure the apocalyptic flood. And it was because Paul was dealing with this idea of the ant farm and the ideological death spiral that I had posted.
It's called a March of Death as well.
March of Death, the death circle
really
in the middle.
happened?
Yes.
So they'll just walk in a circle until they...
Wow. Because they can't see the big picture.
Yeah.
They're a tiny ant, and to them, they're just following the path. And the path is one big circle, and they're all following each other, and more keep funneling in until they eventually just starve to death or dehydration and die. That's wokeness.
Okay, and so that's the cult. That's the idea of the cult. They're just following orders. They're following the rules. There's no ant colony that's held together, and everybody has their role. Everybody has their spot in the ant colony, and they have a shared purpose and a common goal of saving the colony from the flood. It's just the cult, and the cult, it's just following the person, following the rules, following that set of rules like they were talking about. But I posted this, and story is a container for transporting knowledge and even wisdom in its most potent form. That's what we're talking about. There's others. If you want to follow this post, you can. It's Strange Theology on X. The Strange Theology podcast. And then this conversation shows up. So it's like not an accident. This was February 14th. When did I post this? February 12th, 2 days later. So it's just funny to me that 2 days later, Joe Rogan, who I happen to cover on this podcast, has this conversation with Will Storr. And the theme of story, community, enduring chaos, and not... And the caution there, again, from Joe, I think is a good one of like, don't fall for the cults. Don't fall for that trap. So I hope that's helpful for you. I hope that's beneficial. If you've found sort of meaning in this sort of new form of dialogue that I'm attempting to create here, share that. Share it with a friend. Share in the comments. I'd love your feedback. I do live streams, usually middle of the week, Tuesday or Wednesday night, and you can always jump into one of those, and I would love to interact with you there. And I will catch you in the next one.